Welcome to the Chase Podcast. Dr. Ron Charles is a renowned archaeologist, author, historian, speaker, missionary, and is known as the Christian Indiana Jones. Dr. Charles has spent over 50 years researching and uncovering truths about Jesus Christ and information that proves the historical authenticity of the Bible. Gleaned from his years of tireless research, ministry, and archaeological work as the pages of the Bible come to life like never before. Visit cubitfoundation.org for Dr. Ron's books and information about this global ministry.
We are now on the seashore of the northern seashore of the Sea of Galilee. The city of Capernaum was very much a Roman city, and there was a celebration that was called the Saturnium Positium. It was established by the Greeks in about the year 600 BC. And in that, one of the priests of Poseidon one day was out throwing fish and offerings out into the Adriatic Sea. And he says he had a vision, and Poseidon came up out of the sea and told him that there would be a time in the future that during the time of sacrifice to the god of the sea, that the king of the world, the ruler of all humanity, whose kingdom would last forever and whose empire would have no end, would be revealed to the people of the world. Now, from that time forward, in approximately November, December of every year, there would be a celebration which people would go down to the sea in Greece, and they would have these sacrifices, and there would be a great anticipation for this person to be revealed. Well, when the Romans came on the scene and conquered the Greeks, they maintained the same celebration, but by now it's called the Celebratium Neptunus. And it's because Neptune is now the god of the sea rather than Poseidon. And so it was held in Atium and for many, many years. And then under the rule of Augusta, the celebration was moved to the newly established city of Capernaum. And it was here that this celebration was moved to, one of the greatest celebration of ancient times, especially for the Romans. And by then, it had advanced tremendously. And now, throughout the entire month of December, and it was established in December now, through that month, people would come from all over the world. They would come to the celebration. And in this case, now as we kind of go forward a few centuries, we're now in Capernaum at the time of Jesus. And each December, this celebration would take place in this city. Now, because this area was mostly all Greek, Syrian, and Roman, very few Jews, but the Jews still wanted their money for the construction and the continuation of the construction of the temple in Jerusalem. So they still had what they call the stranger's tax, or the pilgrim's tax, that had to be paid, and that had to be paid before the end of the year each year. Now in Judea, you could pay that. Each male member of the Jewish race could pay that tax between April and December of any year, any time during that time. But in this area, in the Galilee, we had less than 2% Jews, and especially in this area where you had very, very few, you paid the tax before the end of the year, and preferably in the last week of the year. And so when this celebration moved here, and hold that thought because I'll get back to that, okay? So when this celebration was moved here, and it became a great, great, great moneymaker for Rome. Now, this is the shore. Now, if you can imagine, if you will, starting from this point, and we're about in the Kota, about where it was the north and south street of the city. We're about at that location, and it ended into a big boardwalk at the shoreline. This boardwalk extended approximately 300 meters that direction and 300 meters this direction. And then there was another pier that went out into the Sea of Galilee. It went out 120 meters. And this pier had small piers off of it where boats can be docked. But this pier was it was open pier, but also had a roof on top of it, and there were columns, a Greek columns that held the roof up all the way down this pier. It was probably the most beautiful pier that you have outside of Alexandria in the ancient world, and it was built right here. And so this became the center of the celebration nuptium, this particular pier. Now, during the celebration over the centuries, by now the celebration had gone on about 700 years. There had been great festivities surrounding it. Songs have been written about it, and poems have been written about it, with the anticipation that this great world leader was going to be revealed, and it was going to be, and that we would be here, and we would be eyewitnesses to this event. And just like today, we have songs. You've sing them about the coming of Jesus. The second coming. You look forward to the anticipation when the sky split and Jesus comes back victorious, and we have books written about it. We have songs written about it. We have plays written about it. Performances, television shows, Left Behind series. This type of thing. The same thing with these. There are hundreds of songs and poems and dramas and plays that were performed anticipating this great event. And each year, people would gather by the tens and hundreds of thousands and wait in anticipation. Now, over the years, some rules and regulations were established. In the year 310, the identification principles were put into play. And these identification principles says this, that as they give the sacrifices to Poseidon, and under Rome, it'd be Neptune, then the fish would then take the sacrifices and eat them on behalf of the sea god. But that there would be a time where a fish would be caught, and in the fish's mouth would be a piece of gold. And that piece of gold, if the person who caught that fish and the fish had the piece of gold, then the one who caught the fish, he would be the one who is chosen by the gods to reveal to the world who this great world leader, redeemer, king, emperor is. So now they were set every year. Every year, people by the thousands would be out there throwing their nets and trying to pull back fish. Well, that became a real nuisance. So Mark Antony, the Roman tribunal, Mark Antony set the principles of how that was to be operated. Said, no more are we going to have these thousands of people out here with their nets. This is the way it's going to be done. The priests of Neptune will appoint only a few who will be chosen to fish. And so that was the case for about 10 years. It was still too chaotic. And so now, Augustus Caesar, he set the stage. Now, he said, okay, no more. No more are we going to allow fishing by nets at this celebration. So now, the priest of Neptune, he handpicked, out of a crowd of thousands, he handpicked 12 people, 12 men. Those 12 men were given the Persian way of aristocratic fishing, a pole and a line and a hook. They were given those, and then those 12 are the only ones who were allowed to fish on the day that the that the revelation is supposed to take place, which was the 28th of December every year. So now let's fast forward to Jesus. Jesus and his disciples had returned from Mount Hermon, and they were now in Capernaum. When they entered the city, it was time to pay the stranger tax, the pilgrim tax, for the benefit of the temple. And so the box that was set up right here, just before you go into the pier, and this is where all Jewish males on that day, they're supposed to put the money in, because that was their day to pay this temple tax. And so it was right here. Now, when Jesus and his disciples were walking out of the Carta and going into the city, Peter was approached and said, "Does your master pay the tax?" And then Peter immediately spoke up and he said, well, yes, naturally. Yes, he does. And then Jesus confronted him about that a little later on, and said, who's to pay this tax? The children of the kingdom are strangers. And then he answered, and so Jesus then told him to do something very interesting. He told him that go and put a line in the water and bring up the first fish that you see. Now, at this time, beginning on the 27th, men began to line up on this pier. And the line stretched all the way down the Carta, all the way around the city, and thousands of men were lined up waiting for the priests to appoint one of them as one of the 12. Because if you're chosen as one of the 12, then for the next year, you are free from all taxes. If you are one of the 12 chosen and you caught a fish, then you are free from taxes for the rest of your life. You are free not only from taxes, but you are exalted to the highest level. You are given Roman citizenship, and your family became Roman citizens into the higher echelons of society. So it was a great honor to be chosen. But the Jews held it in absolute utter contempt. It was a pagan holiday, pagan celebration, and they certainly weren't going to be involved with that type of thing, although they did reap the benefits of it, because along this boardwalk during this celebration time, little stands were set up, and you could sell your falafels and your hot dogs and Coca-Colas and whatever, and so they reap the benefits of it, kind of like today. Most Jewish families in America celebrate Christmas because that's a paid holiday. You get the day off. And so that's how it was here. They looked at it with absolute utter contempt, but they still reap the benefits from it. But then Jesus told Peter, when he told him this, when you look between the lines, what Jesus was telling Peter was this: okay, Peter, go stand in line. Because the only way you're going to be catching a fish with a line is to stand in line and be chosen. And I'm sure Peter says, "Are you kidding me?" But he didn't question Jesus. He went and stood in line. All night long, you stand in line. All day long, you stand in line. And then at midday, the 12 were chosen. Sporadically, the priest of Neptune went down, and you go around the other side of the city, you and you. Then they had a chance to celebrate their being picked for the afternoon. Then just as the sun began to go down, the 12 gathered on the pier that was to go out into the Sea of Galilee. There they were given their pole, their line, and their hook. For 700 years, people have been waiting with great anticipation for the revelation of the great ruler of the world, the one whose kingdom would have no end, whose empire would last an eternity, who would be King of kings and Lord of lords, greater than all kingdoms, greater than all empires. And that one of those, one day, one person would be chosen to reveal that man. So again, the crowd held its breath, waiting again. What was going to happen this year? The 12 stood, and then the priest gave them their line, their hook, their pole, and led them to their appointed position. There would be 6 on one side of the pier as it went down, 6 on the other side. There was a big bonfire that was lit right in this particular area. And as the bonfire reached its fullest extent, the sun now completely gone, the priest would raise his hand and he would say, "Hail Neptune, King of the oceans and the seas." And at that point, the 12 would drop their line, their hook, into the sea, in the Sea of Galilee, to see what would happen next. If there was a fish that was caught, then the fish was held up and determined what was going to be next. The priest then is the one who would choose which fish is going to be looked at first. Normally, that's the first one that was caught. Okay? And so the priest is the one who says, okay, no more. And so all 12 didn't have to catch a fish. And the priest had the option to call the thing off at any time after the first fish is caught. We don't know. According to the Roman records, there were 3 fish caught that day. Peter caught the first one. Now, when the priest says, okay, this is it, then the priest and his priestly entourage, they would take the fish, they would hold it up as a dedication, and they would say, is this the one? Is this the day? Is this the man? Because if he opens the fish's mouth and there was a piece of gold in there, then the 700-year prophecy expectation will have been accomplished. Peter's fish was chosen. The fish was held up. And as the priest opened the mouth, shock went all over him. Chills went up and down his spine because there was a piece of gold in there, but there was a problem. It was a coin. For 700 years, they had been expecting a nugget of gold. And for 300 years, since it became part of the rules and regulations, the anticipation was a nugget of gold. But what was inside of this fish's mouth was a Julian Uriana. It was a legal tender, but it was a commemorative coin minted in memory of Julius Caesar. It was a gold coin. There were only 1,000 of them printed. It was legal tender. You could use it to buy stuff with, but no one had ever seen one because it was only circulated within the upper echelon, the highest class. Just like in America, we have $100,000 bills. You know, Harrah's casino in Las Vegas has 10 of them on display. There's only 5,000 of them ever printed. It's legal tender, but who would spend it? And how could you spend it? Such was the case with this gold coin. It had been talked about, been rumored that it existed. Everybody knew that it existed, but no one had ever seen one. And here it was, this legal tender in the mouth of this fish, this gold that everyone had been waiting 700 years. So now the priest didn't know what to do. They gathered together in bunches, People on the shore say, what's going on? What's happening? The rumors begin to spread. Peter caught a fish with gold in his mouth. Others said, well, yeah, but why isn't he proclaimed winner? And where is the man that he's to proclaim? Then other rumors. He follows Jesus. Could it be that Jesus is this man? At the end of 18 hours, the priest made his decision. He said, yes, Peter did catch a fish. Yes, there was gold in his mouth. But it was not the gold that tradition says must be. And so this disqualified him. Even though Peter was the man to introduce the world to the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, it was disqualified because it did not fit into tradition. The celebration lasted another 300 years. Never again was a fish caught with any type of gold in his mouth. But Peter himself, he felt good about that. He felt real good about it. As he walked back up, people began to pat him on the back. Then that led to being lifted up on the shoulders. Walking through the streets of Capernaum, feeling real good. When they all gathered together and by themselves, Jesus and the disciples, the argument broke out. Peter saying, I was the one chosen. Me. He told me to go fishing. He told me to catch the fish. He told me to get the gold. So who is the greatest in the kingdom? And I'm sure that Matthew was right along beside him. He said, hey, I was the worst of them all. I was a tax collector, but he picked me anyway. So who is actually the greatest? There was Philip. Philip said, hey, I was the first. I was the first one that he picked. First one that he said, follow me. So I must be the greatest. Judas says, hey, I'm the banker. He trusts me with the money. And if he trusts me with the money, then I must be the greatest. And Jesus basically said to them all, he says, you don't get it, do you? Enough's enough. And then Jesus said, and he called a taught child. A taught child, we would call that child today as a Down syndrome child. A taught child, a Down syndrome child, is one that was used in the Roman Empire as sex slaves. There were also the ones that were given the menial responsibilities. It was their responsibility to wash the feet of people who came into the home. It was their job to wash their feet. Taught childs were quite interesting, just like Down syndrome children today, is that they have the ability to not remember the bad that happens to them. As a matter of fact, the Down syndrome child cannot remember anything negative in their life past 45 hours. They're also colorblind. They don't know the difference between colors. And to our allegories today, they're colorblind in that they can't distinguish races, societies, and cultures. But Jesus called this one who their society cursed. As a matter of fact, the worst negative comment that can be given to you is that you're a tyrist, a tyism, which means that you are the lowest of the low and the worst of the worst. Jesus brought this one to them. And he said, guys, you're my disciples. I have chosen you to spread this gospel, and I've chosen you to be me when I leave. to do the things that I do. But let me tell you something. Unless you make an about face in your attitude and become as one of these, you don't have to worry about who's going to be the greatest, because you're not going to be there. Because this one is the greatest. And whoever offends one of these, it'd be better than a millstone be tied around his head and thrown into the sea. Now, that was not a Jewish form of punishment, nor a Roman. It was an Egyptian form of punishment. And what it meant is that if you offended the gods in Egypt, if you offended the gods, then, or if you offended Pharaoh, then you were a millstone or a grinding stone was tied around your neck. You were thrown into the Nile River. And as Zeth, the god of the underworld, saw you sinking, then that meant that you offended the king, the Pharaoh, you offended the gods, and that your name is stricken from the rolls of ever lived. In other words, no one would even know that you ever even existed. And Jesus told them, if you offend one of these little ones, it would be as if you never even existed, as far as my Father is concerned. And I can imagine the follow-up conversation that Jesus had. He said, now, Peter, I gave you an honor, but it was not an honor that you were to use to beat your other disciples, your brothers, over the head with. You are not the greatest. None of you are the greatest. Only those that humbly follow after me. And it was that lesson that he said, probably right where you're sitting. And that event took place right here. Questions? Comments? Anybody?
Did Peter get his Roman citizenship for catching the fish?
He did indeed. He got his Roman citizenship, and but Peter denounced that citizenship. He denounced it in the year 52, and it was during the time of the first year reign of Nero. He denounced it, and denounced it on his own. It wasn't taken from him. And but when he denounced it, then that meant that his entire family was also had to be relieved of their citizenship.
The Chase with Dr. Ron Charles is sponsored by supporters of the Cubit Foundation. Visit cubitfoundation.org for Dr. Ron's books and discover how you can support this global ministry.